and welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks as always for sticking me in your ear. And if you want to go deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to consider becoming a premium subscriber. And to do that, just go to the website, strangeplanet.ca. There's a link there. You can click on that, or you can go to strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. There are several monthly tiers to choose from. Choose the one that's right for you, and you can enjoy all the benefits. All right. About a dozen years ago, I had a TV show called The Conspiracy Show. It ran up here in Canada for 4 seasons on Vision TV, and we sold it internationally. And it was either season 1 or season 2. We produced an episode on microwave radiation and the deleterious health effects of microwave radiation. And my guest at that time is joining me again today to see if there's any new developments in this regard. Magda Havas is a professor emeritus with the School of the Environment at Trent University. And it's great to have you back, Magda. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and thank you for having me back on your show.
EMF is what we're talking about here, correct?
That's
Electromagnetic frequency. And I know that, in your field, you talk about the health benefits and also the detrimental health effects of electric fields, electromagnetic fields, and we've talked about Tesla medicine on the program before. But let's go back to that conversation about a dozen years ago, and we were talking about EMF then. The big debate with the so-called skeptics or the critics is that it's non-ionizing radiation, and therefore it can impact us at the cellular level. It can impact our DNA. Let's begin there. How does EMF affect us in a deleterious fashion?
Well, one of the things, EMFs, and I'm going to call it electrosmog. EMF is electromagnetic fields, basically, but it includes radiation as well. And so a more comprehensive term is electrosmog. It's a form of pollution, just like air pollution or chemical smog. And it affects us by stressing our body. So the fact that physicists and the governments that regulate this have based it on a heating effect came back from around the time of World War II, when they were testing radar. And they were wondering, and radar is simply microwave radiation. And they were trying to figure out, well, how much radiation can those working with the radar be exposed to? And some of the men working there were actually complaining of headaches and various issues. And that's when they decided to figure out what was harmful. And it took them quite a few years, and they thought it was related entirely to heating. And the understanding at the time was that if it's not ionizing radiation, if it's not gamma radiation, if it's not X-rays, then it doesn't have enough energy to damage DNA to basically kick out an electron from an atom or from a molecule. And so the concept was that this can't harm your body. But we do know that microwaves can heat the body because, we have microwave ovens now that were originally called radar ranges that housewives didn't particularly care for. And we know that they excite water molecules, and the water molecules start vibrating, and it's that vibration that creates the heat. And so water absorbs microwave radiation, and some of the radar operators were commenting that in the middle of winter, if they stood closer to the radar antennas, they were warm. And it was because it was basically microwaving their body. And some of them were developing cataracts, and they were complaining of headaches. And so when they came up with the guidelines, they didn't take into account all these other things that could happen to you because there had been no testing, no science on it. We've learned since, though, that one of the major effects of microwave radiation is that it produces stress on the body. And so you go into something called a fight or flight response. Your autonomic nervous system gets your sympathetic nervous system operating. And it's very hard for these people to relax, to go to sleep, to digest food, to heal. And so as they're exposed for long periods of time, even to very low levels of radiation coming from normal things in the house that are now wireless, that they can develop these symptoms and become quite ill and debilitated.
So you mentioned the microwave oven, and I read recently, well, I think it was as of 2017, something like 90% of North American homes have a microwave oven. And microwaves, they operate what, around is it 2.45 gigahertz, I think.
Yeah,
That's
actually,
the frequency.
microwave radiation refers to anything from 300 megahertz, which is 300 million cycles, to 300 gigahertz, which is 300 billion cycles. And 2.4 falls within that range. 2.4
Okay.
gigahertz falls within that range.
Why did they choose 2.45?
They were doing a lot of testing because that was the temperature at which water absorbed optimally. And they made this a free frequency. So, for example, if you're a cell phone provider and you want to have people using your cell phone in a particular area, you have to apply for a license with Health Canada in Canada and with the Federal Communication Commission in the United States. And you have to purchase part of the spectrum. Just like if you're a radio station, you have to own the channel you're on. 940 AM, for example, is 940 kilohertz. That's the actual frequency where the signal is sent out. That's the carrier frequency. And so you have to pay for that. The radio station has to pay for that frequency for a certain geographic area. And they realized that if we're going to have microwaves and other wireless technology in the home, people don't need to pay for that frequency. So you can have a microwave oven. And they made 2.45 a free frequency. So anything can operate at that, and you don't need a license for it. They've now since made 60 gigahertz a free Wi-Fi frequency as well. And this is part of the 5G rollout that we can talk about later on if you like. So they picked 2.45 because it happened to be the optimal absorption for water. And that just became a free frequency. And that's used for all sorts of things, from cordless phones to baby monitors to, Wi-Fi and other devices in the home.
All right. So cell phones and Wi-Fi, where are they operating on the band?
Well, cell phone, yes, they're both operating within the microwave band. So they're both microwave radiation, and cell phones range from about 800 megahertz up to about 1.2 gigahertz. So there's a range, and there's different channels for different operators, especially if they're in the same geographic area. They can't interfere with one another, so they have to have different carrier frequencies. So they're both within the microwave band. So are baby monitors, so is Bluetooth. If you have Bluetooth on your phone or on your computer, they're all within the microwave band.
So, as you mentioned, you call it this, electronic smog. I think you used that term.
Electrosmog.
Electrosmog. We've got cell phone towers everywhere. We have wireless everything now. How much are we being exposed to? How much EMF? How do we measure that? Is a typical person exposed to, living in the city of Toronto, let's say?
Well, unfortunately, they're exposed to more and more radiation that's totally unnatural. You mentioned some of the items already, but there's also smart meters that are attached to homes for which you have no sort of control over. And then all the gadgets in your home that might be wireless. They have smart appliances now that will eventually talk to your smart meter. You can even purchase light bulbs that you can turn on and off with your cell phone. So these are wireless as well, and they emit very high levels of radiation, not as high as our guidelines, but certainly levels that are much higher, that are making people ill, that are currently making people ill. And if you live in a city like Toronto, you basically have difficulty getting away from it, unless you're living in one of the wealthier areas where your houses are further apart. Then it's a little bit better. But if you're in row housing, if you're in condominiums, apartment buildings with multi-unit dwellings, you're going to be exposed to your radiation, whatever you're generating, plus what's coming from your neighbors, plus what's coming from outdoors, because this radiation passes through windows and walls and ceilings and floors. So it's not stopped by those different objects.
In Eastern Europe, they have a different view. They consider the threshold, or they say the threshold for our exposure to EMF should be much, much lower. How do they deal with it?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. You're right. Eastern Europe and Russia have virtually 1/100th of the exposure we have here in Canada as their guideline. And one of the reasons for that is when the United States was first testing microwaves radar, it was top secret. And they didn't release any of that information. And they were looking at it primarily from detecting enemy aircrafts. And then they were looking at it whether it could be used as a weapon, and it can be. When the Eastern Europeans and the Russians were first looking at microwaves, they were looking at it from a medical perspective. They were investigating whether or not you can use microwaves or radio frequency radiation, slightly lower levels than microwaves, whether you can use them for healing. You know, and they have a socialist system, so they have to pay for healthcare, and they wanted to keep the costs as low as possible. So they were doing research starting at the lower end to find out if we, you know, increase this exposure, will it still be healthy? Will it still have the healing qualities? So the US and Russia, Soviet Union at the time, came to it from two totally different perspectives. And that's the reason we have different guidelines, because the Russians and Eastern Europeans recognize that very low levels are biologically active. So does Health Canada, because they've approved certain devices that emit pulsed electromagnetic fields that have a beneficial biological effect that are well below the guidelines. But they seem to not be able to get their head around that you can have very harmful effects at slightly higher levels of exposure. And they've simply ignored that, all the beneficial effects, and just focus on the negative effects and from thermal radiation only.
There are some scientists and researchers who are warning about in fact, I think we probably talked about this way back in 2011, 2012, about a future catastrophe, like what's the word I'm looking for? It just like brain cancers, like crazy numbers. An epidemic. Thank you. Epidemic of brain cancer because of cell phone use. Mm-hmm. We talked about it then. Where are we at now? Are we starting to see that?
Well, actually, we are. There are now a few health inventories where they're monitoring the changes in brain tumors and other types of cancers. They do that in quite a few countries. The United States has some amazing statistics on that. So does a number of European countries. And one of the things that's beginning to show up now is that if you look at brain tumors overall, if you classify brain tumors just as one group, irrespective of where the tumor is, what type of tumor it is, then that curve is fairly flat. And it might even be sort of going slightly down because we're diagnosing brain tumors earlier and treating them. And so there are fewer people, in a sense, than there used to be before. However, when you hold a cell phone to your head, you're going to get the highest level of exposure right around your temple and a little bit in your frontal lobe, which is where you do executive thinking, and a little bit at the base of your neck. So you're going to get half of your face with very high exposure. And by the time it gets to the other side of your head, the levels of exposure are much lower. So you've absorbed a lot of that radiation. And so if you look at tumors that are called ipsilateral tumors, these are tumors that are on the same side of your head that you hold a cell phone. You know, so some people hold it next to their left ear because they're right-handed and they write. Other people use right ear, and, you know, some switch. But if you look at where people predominantly use their cell phones, and if you look at ipsilateral tumors rather than contralateral, which is the other side of your brain, they found that ipsilateral tumors are actually much more prevalent than contralateral tumors. That's one of the things they're finding. They're finding that tumors are occurring very close to the edge of your head rather than the middle of your brain. And that's because they've got higher levels of exposure. And there's one type of brain tumor called glioblastoma multiforme. It's one of the most virulent types of brain tumors. And that's the one that seems to be increasing now in the population. And it's increasing among younger and younger people. So in the past, brain tumors were something you got, eventually as you aged, for a small percentage of the population. That percentage is now increasing, and it's a very deadly form of tumor. And if you were very young, under the age of 20, and when you first started using a cell phone, the risk of developing a tumor is now fourfold higher with a cell phone than without. So young people, no one should hold the cell phone to their head, but especially young people, because their brains are developing, they're growing, and they've got a lifetime ahead of them. And if they develop the cancer early on, then that's obviously going to have major effects on their wellness and on their health, if not on their life.
Can we lessen the risk just by holding the cell phone, and putting it on speakerphone, or are we so radiated from this electrosmog that it really doesn't make a difference at this point?
Well, it actually does make a difference. So when you're dealing with electromagnetic radiation, one of the things you learn in physics, and this still applies, this is one of the laws of physics, is that the radiation decreases exponentially. So even if you move it just a few centimeters away from your head, you're reducing your exposure by more than 50%. And obviously, the further away you hold it, the less your exposure is going to be. And so using speakerphone is probably the best way to speak on your cell phone, especially if you put your cell phone down and you're not even holding it in your hand. Obviously, your hand isn't as sensitive as your brain tissue is, but even there, you don't want to be exposed to this radiation. So distance, when it comes to a cell phone, can be huge in reducing your exposure. So there's a lot that people can do just by minimizing the distance, or maximizing the distance, and minimizing the amount of time you spend with wireless technology.
Magda, we'll take a time out, come back and discuss further. What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the... Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is, I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. We're talking about the dangers of EMF. Magda Havas is with us, Professor Emeritus with the Trent School of the Environment. What about, well, you mentioned baby monitors. How, the wireless using EMF, microwave, what are your concerns there? I mean, if they're far enough away from the baby, are they safe?
No. The younger you are, the more sensitive you're going to be. You don't have a well-developed immune system yet as an infant. Your body's, the cells are growing, dividing very, very rapidly. And so it's almost like if you're on a bike and it's going very quickly and you put something among the spokes, you're going to have a big fall. If you're moving slowly, if you're not moving at all, if your cells aren't, dividing, and you put something in the spokes, it's not going to be as nearly as harmful. So you want to protect infants and young children as much as possible from this type of toxin. And having a baby monitor in a room with an infant is too much exposure. And very often the baby monitor is placed fairly close to the crib, which is even worse. And then the parent would have the other part of the baby monitor, usually, hanging on a belt or in a hip pocket, and they're being exposed simultaneously. And it's their reproductive organs that are getting the most exposure if they've got it on their body, for example. In Europe, you can buy baby monitors that are sound activated. And so there's no radiation until the baby cries. Then it turns on, sends out a signal to the parent monitor, and wham, you go into the room and you see what's wrong with the infant. The baby monitors we have here in North America, emit radiation all the time. They're on all the time, whether the baby's crying or whether they're not crying, it makes absolutely no difference. And so we're exposed 24/7, whereas in Europe, they're exposed for maybe a few minutes maximum each day, for the short period that it turns on. And really what we need are sound activated baby monitors here as well. And the same goes for your cordless phone. People who still have cordless phones in their home, not just cell phones, those cordless phones are irradiating the entire home 24/7, whether you're using it or not. And if you take your cordless phone and walk, 100 meters away from your home, chances are you can still use it. So we're talking about a very powerful transmitter. And having something like a cordless phone in your home or a baby monitor, it's like having a cell tower almost in your house, because that's what they're doing. They're both radiating microwave radiation.
You mentioned reproductive organs, cell phone use, and things like testicular cancer, because, young boys, men carrying these things around in their hip pocket. Is there more than correlation? Do we now know, is there causation?
There's a very strong correlation with damaged sperm. That's been documented by more than 30 studies. So men who keep a cell phone in or near their hip pocket have a greater risk of developing testicular cancer and having sperm that is virtually immobile, deformed, simply, not something that can survive very long, really damaged sperm. And so my advice to couples who are wanting to have children is that they should both detox, with men at least 3 months, because it takes 3 months to produce new sperm. Women are born with all their eggs. So if their eggs are damaged, we're talking about damage to future generations as well, if indeed they're still fertile. So there's infertility issues, there's damage to the embryo issues, there's teratogenic effects for coming up in multiple generations, and there's testicular cancer as well. And a lot of this has been documented, not so much with cell phones, but rather with police who were using radar guns, for traffic cops. And they would point the radar gun at, on the street to clock the cars driving by. And they wouldn't turn it off. They just hold it in their laps when they were waiting. And they were basically irradiating their genitals. And so testicular cancer was one of the outcomes. At this stage, it's still considered a correlation, but I'm absolutely convinced it's causal because of all the other types of cancers we're getting with proximity to a microwave emitting device, like the brain tumors, the thyroid cancer, the salivary gland cancer, all associated with the head region and cell phone exposure.
Is Health Canada doing any serious studies on this? I mean, why don't these things and baby monitors all come with health warnings? You can't pick up a pack of cigarettes without a picture of a diseased lung, and signs in bars and pubs, telling women not to drink. Are there any advisories coming from Health Canada?
Very few. Cell phone manufacturers have had to put in statements for the distance the device should be kept from your body. That's true for tablets as well. So a cell phone should be kept roughly an inch away from your body, or 2.5 centimeters, something like that, ideally. So you shouldn't hold it in your body. A lot of women put their cell phones in their bra, and they've started developing breast cancer right where the cell phone was. So it's a really unusual type of breast cancer. So Health Canada the cell phone manufacturers do have warnings as to how far the device should be from your body. But Health Canada, in my mind, is a captured agency. They have stopped protecting the health of Canadians associated with wireless technology. I don't think they've ever been protected in that regard. They started out with the thermal effect, and they stick by it. They won't acknowledge research that's showing effects at non-thermal levels. They say that they recognize that there are studies out there, but it hasn't influenced the guidelines. And we have some of the worst guidelines globally of all countries.
When we did the show, 2011, 2012, I think cell phones were in what iteration was it? 2G, maybe 3G. Now we have 5G. Talk to me about, does that ramp up the health issues?
It sure does. So we've gone from, first generation, which was just called, regular cell phone, all the way up to 5G now. And there's attempts to make, 6G, 7G, 8G, 9G, 10G, whatever. And it doesn't sound very harmful, 5G, we're just going up one generation. But there's a really big difference between 5G and 4G and 3G. So with 5G, we have a very broad frequency range that is being used. So we have something called sub 1 gigahertz. So these are levels of exposure at frequencies less than 1 gigahertz. And then we have up to 6 gigahertz, which is another range. And then we have higher than 6 gigahertz, and that's called millimeter waves. And so with 5G, we have not only the sub 6 gigahertz, which has been with all the other technology, but we now also have millimeter waves. And millimeter waves have not been tested for their effects on long-term chronic exposure. Millimeter waves are used by the military for crowd control. They have tanks that have these antennas on them, these saucer-shaped antennas, and they can aim a beam at this millimeter wave frequency at a crowd at a fairly high level for a split second, because it causes pain. It basically causes the water molecules in your sweat glands to heat up and boil.
Yeah.
And so it's
non-lethal weapons. Yeah.
That's right. It's a non-lethal weapon, but it's a very painful method that can direct crowds. So you're not going to stand there for any period of time. You're going to move away out of that beam. And so it's non-lethal, and in that respect, it's better than killing people. But and they've been testing military personnel with this, but one of the things they're not telling people is that your eyes are very sensitive. And if you don't have appropriate shielding on your eyes, special glasses to prevent the millimeter waves, then your risk of developing a cataract goes up exponentially. And so they're testing these young military personnel, men and women, exposing them even for a split second, but that split second is enough to do the damage. The other location where millimeter waves are used are at airports. When you go through and there's the equivalent of a metal detector that you just walk through, and the light comes on or it doesn't. And you have those other ones that are more circular, where you have to raise your hands above your head, like you're being arrested or something, and you're saying, I give up, I give up. And those use millimeter wave frequencies. And while, once again, travelers would go through them and they'd be in there for a few seconds, the personnel at airports are asked to test those several times a day to calibrate them. And they're complaining of health effects as well. So they shouldn't be exposed. They shouldn't be even standing near where these millimeter waves are being used. And the third use of millimeter waves is in medicine, where once again, the exposures last for anywhere from seconds to minutes. not 24 hours a day, which is what we're going to have with the telecom. So, millimeter waves, constant exposure is far from ideal. And I'm anticipating a lot of different adverse health effects, mostly at the skin level, because millimeter waves don't penetrate very deeply. And so I think we're going to have a lot of skin rashes, itchiness, all sorts of problems with a person's skin and the nervous system that's very close to the surface of your skin. So you're going to have peripheral nerve damage from these millimeter waves. That's my sort of guesstimate. And it will simply take time before we can document this in the population. But that's coming now because the 5G is being rolled out globally.
Magda, when we come back, we'll talk about the effects of EMF on plants and bees. Stay with us.
What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Magda Havas is with us, Professor Emeritus with the Trent School of the Environment. And this is an area you've done some serious research into, and that is the effect of EMF on plants. What are you seeing?
Well, there was some students in a school, I think it was in Denmark, where their teacher said, let's find out if the Wi-Fi routers in our school are having an effect on plants. And so they had some seedlings, watercress seedlings that germinate very quickly. They put them on some damp towels. They put one near a router, and they put one in a location where there was no Wi-Fi router. And what the students found was that the seedlings simply failed to germinate when they were close to a Wi-Fi router. And, although, the experiment was a little clumsy and it wasn't perfectly executed, it was really fascinating. And I was intrigued by what they did. So we repeated their study with 4 different species, I think 4 or 5 different species of seedlings. And we found that the seedlings varied in their sensitivity, but basically all of them had some problem when they were exposed to the Wi-Fi router. And this is just a normal Wi-Fi router you would have in your home. So we have a special room in our lab that is shielded from external sources of radiation. And we simply put a Wi-Fi router in there, had a growing bank of, appropriate lights and everything, put the seedlings in and waited for them to germinate. And we let that go on for about 30 days. And we had another one in a different location that wasn't exposed to any of the radiation. And we found a huge difference. Basically, the root system stopped growing in the pea plants, and there was much less growth in above above ground biomass. They just didn't grow as tall. They weren't vigorous. And it was obvious they couldn't survive for very long without a root system. Some of the plants actually grew away from the microwave source, from the Wi-Fi router, which was interesting because plants will grow towards light. The light was immediately above them, and so they should have been growing straight, which is how they were in our control environment. But in the environment where we had the Wi-Fi router, they were actually growing away from the Wi-Fi, almost as though they were trying to avoid it. And we've got photographs of this that are really quite traumatic. And the other thing we noticed is that some of the plants were infected by fungus. And one of the things we've learned about microwave radiation is that it impairs the immune system in animals and in humans. And it looks like it's probably impairing the immune system among the plants as well, and making them much more susceptible to any kind of fungal or bacterial infection. So we know that it affects plants. And if you look near where people have smart meters on the side of their homes, if they have a bush near the smart meter, one of the things we've noticed is that bush begins to die after the first or second year with a smart meter there. And that's because the radiation is once again, killing the plants. And in some cases, encouraging the growth of mites and other pathogens that would, make the plant much more sensitive as a result. So we've done, and people in Europe are finding that trees are beginning to die where they're exposed to microwave radiation. So if there's a cell phone tower, a building between the cell phone tower and then a tree, where the tree grows high enough that the radiation can go across above the building, that part of the tree will die. And then eventually the rest of the tree will begin to die as well. So there's a lot of evidence that this is killing plants on a fairly gross scale.
Do you have any research to suggest that EMF may be related to bee colony collapse? Some have attributed that to the use of pesticides and nicotinoids and so forth. Does EMF play a role?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I really feel for the bees, and I think most people do. The bee population is getting decimated, and there's a number of reasons for that. The pesticides is one, the mite population is another, the global change, having very warm winters and having the bees actually come out prematurely, which is what happened this past year here in parts of Ontario. But we do know that microwave radiation affects bees, and there have been several really interesting studies. In one study, they took the bees and moved them away from the hive and then waited to see how long it took the bees to come back. They had marked all the bees on the back, so they knew by the color code they used which bee was in which hive. And the bees that had cell phones at the hive, many of them didn't return at all. So they wouldn't come back to the hive, which is really quite interesting. There was another study where a beekeeper was fascinated by this. And we know that bees will swarm if they're unhappy. If they're unhappy with their location, they will eventually come out of the hive really, really quickly, and then they'll try to find a different location for them to inhabit. And in this particular study, the scientists put a microphone inside the beehive because the bees make a certain sound when they're about to swarm. And so he didn't want them to leave his hive because he was actually enjoying the honey. And so he just simply recorded the sound of the bees. And whenever he turned the cell phone on, they would go into this piping sound saying that they're going to swarm and ultimately leave the hive. Now, we did a test as well where we took a wireless baby monitor and Wi-Fi and took it out to some hives on a farm. And we had one hive where we asked the beekeeper to paint it with a paint that blocks the radiation. And so we had one hive that was totally shielded from the radiation. Once the bees came out, they would be exposed, but inside the hive, they were perfectly safe. And then we had another hive that was just a normal hive. And we put some Wi-Fi router there and a baby monitor and a cordless phone. And we turned on the radiation. And what we noticed was that the bees became very docile. You could go up to them and it was almost like they were barely alive. They were sort of moving, the wings a little bit. Some of the bees are outside the hive and their job is to fan the hive to cool it down right at the entrance. And so they were there, but they were very lethargic. And we had to look very carefully to see if they were still moving and if they were alive. And then by accident, we were on a farm, and the farm dog decided to run across the extension cord we were using, and that disconnected all the power. So suddenly all the radiation went down, and there was nothing. And the bees started to swarm. They were coming out of the hive like you wouldn't believe. We've got it videotaped. Bob Conley is doing a documentary on this, and he's got some amazing footage. And not only did they come out of the hive, but they were really aggressive. They started to sting all of us. They were going after the dog. There were some swallows in the field, and they were going after the birds. And we had to get out of there very, very quickly. So they became incredibly aggressive. And so we know that they're picking up the radiation. We know they're trying to avoid it based on some of the other studies. And if it's near their hive, they simply want to go somewhere else and swarm and leave the hive. Now, there's some fascinating work being done right now with some magnets, and I happen to have one here that I was given to test. And these magnets were placed on beehives here in Ontario, on professional farms where they have large bee colonies. And the magnets were placed under some hives, but not under others. And this year, when they went to open up the hives, they found that if the hives didn't have the magnets, they were very weak, and in some cases there were no bees left. So whether they swarmed or whether they died, it's sort of hard to tell. And in the hives that had the magnets, they were so strong and so vigorous that they were beginning to swarm, but they were beginning to swarm because there wasn't enough room in the hive for them. And so what the beekeepers had to do is they call it splitting the hive, where they add another box on top to give them more room inside the hive. So if you look at just these results from this one farm, bee farm, the results are really encouraging. Now, this particular location didn't have radio frequency radiation, but the magnet is probably benefiting the immune system of the bees, which means that they can tolerate stressors, which means they should be able to tolerate mites much better, and any kind of stress coming from climatic changes. I don't think they can, that would necessarily make them tolerate pesticides, but certainly some of the other stressors. And they were so vigorous. So we're really quite excited about this. And there's some evidence that using these magnets can actually slow down the ripening of fruit and vegetables. And so by placing things like strawberries on the magnet for just a few minutes, enables them to survive much longer in your fridge. And so we're just doing some testing to find out to what degree that's the case.
These magnets, have they been exposed, like charged with like an oscillator or a Tesla coil?
I don't know exactly how they were made. They're hexagonal magnets, and if you look at, I can show it to you, but it won't show on the radio. But do you see, this shows you the magnetic field?
Yes.
And you can see there's a pattern there to that hexagonal magnet. And that's basically what it looks like. Now, what's really interesting is these magnets, when you put something near a beehive or in a beehive, the bees will cover it with propolis, like they just don't want it in there. And with these magnets, the bees weren't covering them with anything. They were beautifully clear at the end of the season because they had been there all winter long. And I watched the bees sort of just walking across them as though they were actually enjoying, being close to these magnets, which is also intriguing. So there's a heck of a lot of research that needs to be done still, but this is a very promising for beekeepers and for fruit lovers, that require these pollinators.
Right. Yes, and also used in conjunction with manufacturing honey. I mean, honey's already like the perfect food. Now you're imbuing it with these properties from the magnet.
Exactly. And they're also charging up the honey. And when you put the honey under Kirlian photography, honey that's been charged up by the magnet, and we're talking about charging that takes 5 to 10 minutes. So we're not talking about anything that takes a long time. When you look at that under using Kirlian photography, you'll notice that it just has so much more energy after it's been charged. And that could probably be done for other types of food as well, not just honey.
This is potentially very huge. I mean, if we could avert bee colony collapse, that would, I mean, that's an existential threat to humanity. There's no question. Let's just talk for a few minutes about one of the theories that was out there during COVID was that places like Wuhan, which was kind of like ground zero, this was one of the early rollout places for 5G. And then suddenly you had people ripping 5G towers out of the ground in places like the UK and elsewhere in Europe and so forth. Any research to suggest that 5G may have some relationship to COVID? It exacerbates it? It activates it?
Actually, there is. In March and April of 2020, when we were first sort of warned about the pandemic and we were going into lockdown and everything else. I was following Johns Hopkins University, the information they were giving on the number of COVID cases and COVID deaths, that sort of thing. And I was following this quite religiously because I was fascinated by what was happening, deeply disturbed, but also as a scientist, fascinated. And I noticed that on the maps, the number of cases wasn't uniformly distributed. And that's what you might expect for a respiratory illness. It's coming through the air. It should be fairly easily distributed and fairly uniformly. And that wasn't the case. And so I began to look at the data, and I looked at the United States with a colleague of mine, Angela Siang, and we were both reviewing the Johns Hopkins data, and we found that in the United States, there were some states that had 5G rolled out already, so that it was fully active, and other states there wasn't any 5G yet. And so we began to look at the states with and without 5G and looked at the Johns Hopkins data on the number of cases per 100,000 and number of deaths. And one of the things we found is that if you compared states with 5G, their cases per 100,000 was 85% higher than in states without 5G. And if you looked at deaths, the deaths were twice as high in states with 5G. And so the thinking here is that the 5G millimeter waves increases your exposure, which we know it does because we've measured it before and after 5G came into a particular location. And so there's higher levels of radiation that everyone's exposed to where 5G antennas are located. And that we think that it's impairing the immune system. And so when COVID comes along or some bacterial infection comes along, if you've got a weakened immune system, you're likely to develop the symptoms. And if it's weak enough, it might actually kill you. And that's what our data are showing, is that the virus was much more virulent in areas with 5G millimeter waves. And many of my colleagues at the beginning, in the early April 2020, they were wondering, a lot of the symptoms that people have with 5G, they're identical to symptoms of electrohypersensitivity. And they were wondering if these people were actually dying of COVID or whether they were having symptoms of electrohypersensitivity because the levels were simply going up. Wuhan was one of the first places that rolled out 5G. The Princess Cruise Line also had 5G millimeter waves, and they had a huge pandemic on their cruise line. And there were various other countries that had rolled it out, Northern Italy, for example, and there they had a very bad case of it. And so there's evidence coming from other sources now, basically pointing to the same thing, that if you have 5G millimeter waves, and even if you have 4G frequencies, it's going to affect you biologically, and it will make you much more sensitive to any kind of pathogen or viral or bacterial infection.
Magda, let's end this with some tips, maybe, 4 or 5 tips to help people so that they can reduce their exposure to EMF.
Well, behavior is one thing. So using your wireless technology as little as possible or less than you normally do is a really important tip. And by that, I mean, turning your cell phone off when you don't need it. And that means turning off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth as well. And simply, checking it periodically and then returning calls at your convenience rather than being disturbed by it. And I know some people, like doctors, have to have their cell phone on all the time. But for those who don't, that's a really important tip. Keeping as far away from this technology is also helpful. When it comes to Wi-Fi in your home, that's going to be one of the highest sources of exposure. And here you don't have to use Wi-Fi to get on the internet. You can use Ethernet cables. There's something called power line adapters. So you can actually get on, you can use your internet access through wires rather than in a wireless fashion. And not only is it safer, it's faster, it's more economical, it uses much less energy. And so that's another thing you can do. If you're exposed from sources outside of your home, there's ways of shielding. There's material you can get to use as curtains on your windows, and it has some metal fibers in it, and those metal fibers reflect the radiation back out into the environment. So there's ways of protecting yourself and having a very clean bedroom. And I mean a bedroom that doesn't have your cell phone on under your pillow, that doesn't have a Wi-Fi router or a cordless phone, where even the light that you might have near your bed should be at least arm's length away from you so that you're not sleeping in a soup of electromagnetic frequencies. The more metal you have in your home, in your bedroom, the more reflection you're going to get. So people who are sleeping on coiled, the metal coiled mattresses are likely to have greater exposure. And hence, if you can just replace that with something that doesn't have metal in it, it will minimize your exposure. So there's quite a few things with behavior and just replacing wireless with wired technology that can make a huge difference and really prolong your health for much longer periods of time.
And maybe getting our hands on some of those hexagonal magnets we used with the beehives and put those under our pillows.
Right. Well, I have one of these and I'm testing it now to see how quickly bacteria will grow on Petri plates. So we're starting that testing this week, and hopefully we'll have something by the end of the month.
Ah, excellent. All right, Magda, great catching up with you again. Thank you so much for all of your tremendous research and your insights. I appreciate it. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Hey there, welcome to another edition of Strange Planet, and it is a strange planet indeed. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to think about becoming a premium subscriber. Just go to strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. There are a number of monthly tiers that you can choose from. Pick the one that's right for you. All right. In March 2003, U.S. forces invaded Iraq, vowing to destroy Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Remember that? WMDs. And end the dictatorial rule of Saddam Hussein. When WMD intelligence proved illusory, and a violent insurgency arose. The war lost public support. Saddam was captured. He was tried. He was hanged, and democratic elections were held. In the years since, there have been over 5,000 U.S. and allied troop deaths, and more than, well, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians have been killed. Meanwhile, of course, questions continue to linger over Iraq's fractious political situation. So they weren't there for WMDs. There were no WMDs. Or was there? Or was there a particular weapon of mass destruction we've not heard about before? That's where we are headed over the next 45 minutes or so. Mark A. Carpenter is with us once again. He's an anthropologist, an explorer, author, and a messenger of misfortune. He sacrificed a career as a college professor and archaeologist to bring his research directly to the people. And he set out to unlock the mysteries of the pyramids, which, what he found, was corrupt science, secret cults, and validation of ancient tradition. Mark Carpenter, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well, Richard. How you doing?
Very well. So, if people heard our recent show on Coast to Coast, we got into this towards the tail end of our 2-hour conversation, and it's a pretty wild story. Let's see. Shall we begin in 2003 in March? And again, the claim that they were in there because they feared that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, yellow cake, enriched uranium. He was going to make nuclear weapons and so forth. Of course, I don't know that too many people bought that. Enough people did, I suppose. But that again, the intelligence proved illusory. There were no WMDs, but well, you say there was a particular weapon of mass destruction. So let's. How do you want to get into this? How do we start?
Well, so where this began for me, while they were gearing up for that invasion, I was unaware of the details of what we'll get into, but I was on my own parallel journey. I had recently returned from my studies in Mexico, and I had my paradigm shattered. I grew up in a very secular paradigm, very science oriented. My father, a military aerospace engineer, and but what I found in Mexico gave me pause and made me reconsider what is real and what is not. And that led me, and to be specific, I found a certain degree of validation of ancient tradition, specifically the biblical tradition. And anybody who's seen our previous episodes together will have some idea, but for those who haven't, gigantic ruling elites in prehistory with extra toes and fingers. Obviously, some high sophistication in terms of megalithic engineering, and most specifically was this high stratification between these demigod ruling elites, the gigantic six-fingered people mentioned in the Bible, Nephilim descendants. So I've found hard archaeological evidence of that. And these ruling elites, it seemed, were imposing on the native people, like the Maya, a dragon cult that demanded blood sacrifice. And that triggered a really powerful interest in the book of Revelation. And so that's really where this begins for me. Upon returning home and learning what I had learned, I immersed myself in the book of Revelation. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew that this prophecy had a lot more legitimacy to it than I had previously realized. I had studied it before very briefly as just more in the interest of narratology, like why do people, believe what they believe, and how it affects human behavior. But that's really where it began for me.
So you're in the Valley of Mexico. You're studying these pyramids from the Maya civilization. That leads you to an exploration of basically end times prophecy.
Exactly. What specifically caught my attention was this prophecy of the Antichrist and him imposing dragon worship, satanic dragon worship upon the whole world. And so that triggered to me, well, if this race of Nephilim descendants imposes satanic dragon demonic worship onto the common people, that seems to be what's predicted by the Revelation prophecy. And so I dove into it head first, even to an obsessive degree. I really shut myself off, almost like a modern day hermit. I really immersed myself deeply in it, but I really couldn't get anywhere. And it was really taking a toll on my life and my work and my studies. I'm just like obsessively looking for clues, and I really couldn't find any. And then spring of that year, almost exactly to the day, I believe it was the day of April 20th, I had a dream. And I know people listening to that might think, oh, a dream is just a dream. And that was certainly what I thought at the time too. I had this very strange dream and I immediately dismissed it because it's just a dream, right?
When you say of that same year, we're talking April 2003?
April 20, 2003.
Right.
Right then, I had a dream, and it unlocked for me. It yielded a single clue. Now that clue took me I didn't put it together immediately. It took me years, but the dream stuck with me because it was so strange and so unlike dreams I normally have. It stuck with me, and I continued on my way researching these things. But eventually, I put together what that dream meant, and it was a clue that unlocked the Revelation prophecy, specifically the mystery kings aspect of the prophecy.
The mystery kings. Now, are we talking about the 10 kings that are represented by what, the 10 horns on the dragon's head?
That it leads into that part. The prophecy is complex and highly stylized, and it is very confusing, and that's why theologians and religious scholars and clergymen and just secular researchers have been studying it for millennia.
Which is the exact reason I think I'm Greek Orthodox. The Orthodox Church, that's the one book in the Bible that they do not read from during liturgy, just because it is so open to interpretation. They stay away from it.
That's right. We're probably talking about the most enigmatic book in Western history. Well, enigmatic and influential, being that it's a book of the Bible. And so, okay, so what are the mystery kings? The mystery kings actually come before the horn kings that you mentioned. Those are kings that are all future to come. So the author of Revelation is this mysterious fellow, John of Patmos, who is apparently imprisoned on an island, Patmos, for being a Christian. So this is during the reign of Nero, and Nero has outlawed Christianity and has sent them to this prison camp on Patmos, which we can only imagine was an absolutely horrible, agonizing, and miserable existence. Okay, so John of Patmos describes a series of antichrist kings throughout history, not an immediate sequence, but over thousands of years. And the mystery kings have a very specific characteristics. So they are tyrannical rulers of an empire. They demand by state decree some degree of reverence or worship. In other words, they portray themselves as god kings or messianic figures. And by law of their nation, you must acknowledge this. And they declare war on God in different ways. The dream, I have a hard time talking about it because it's so strange. And I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But I think it's important. I've been sitting on this for a long time. And given the state of the world today and what I know, I feel an obligation. So I'm going to tell you about the dream.
Just before you do, just a quick
Sure.
further clarification. John of Patmos is believed to have been John the Apostle, so he would have been one of Christ's disciples.
Well, that's I would say that's up for debate.
Okay.
There is a, yes, you're correct. There are factions of scholars on both sides.
Okay.
There are factions who say that he's John the Apostle, and then there is another faction that says he is a mysterious guy who was. We really don't know, and I'm not proclaiming one way or the other.
All right.
What I know is there's some authenticity to not some. This prophecy is authentic. That's what I've come to learn. But you're right. His identity is very mysterious.
Okay, so back to the 10 kings.
Sure. So in the dream, this was unlike any dream I had had. In most dreams, like I would say most people's dreams, I'm in control. I'm walking around, I'm interacting with people. But in this dream, I had no control. And I had no physical body. It was like I was just a phantom or a fly on the wall. And it was as if I was riding a roller coaster of spectacle. So I had no control. I was just along for the ride, an observer. And I was in a very opulent castle, study, like a medieval castle study, really magnificent. Oil paintings and tapestries and a grand fireplace, fabulous antiquities, a globe, a really opulent globe. And but it was not positive. There was a really strong negative vibe. You know, you ever have that feeling when you're in the room with someone who's like scared or dangerous and you just don't feel comfortable? That was the feeling I got. It was very uncomfortable and very unsettling, and I didn't feel safe. And I'm going around this study, and I would come to a really big, long dining table. And on the table is a map of the world, specifically Asia and Eurasia and Europe. And the map is covered in little military game pieces. And I finally see a man, and he's hunched over the map, and he has a cup of china cup of tea and a saucer. And I can't make out who he is because he's hunched over, and he's tapping the table. And I'm getting closer to him against my will. I don't want to get anywhere near him. He's radiating fear and desperation. And we get near to him, and I see his cup of tea, and I notice it has a swastika on it. And it's even in the dream, it starts to dawn on me who this man is. And he lifts up his head, and sure enough, It is Adolf Hitler. And he is tapping the Eurasian section of the map. And he looks at me, his eyes are bloodshot. He has terrible bags under his eyes, like he hasn't slept in a month. And I didn't think he was aware of my presence, but suddenly I realize he is. And he's looking at me with this dreadful look. And he seems to be saying, look at this spot on the map. And that's it. And I wake up. And like I said, you know, I'm a guy who researches history, the dark side of history. And I dismissed it, you know, strange dream about Adolf Hitler, you know. Mm-hmm. And I must clarify, I am no fan of Adolf Hitler's. This is not a glorification of the tyrannical megalomaniac Adolf Hitler, not remotely. Please, nobody give that a second thought. And I know this is difficult to believe, but if you bear with me, I have scientific evidence to validate everything I say, except for that dream. Now, what on earth, Mark, does this have to do with the Revelation prophecy? In a word, everything. So years later, I'm still studying this prophecy, trying to understand it. And it dawns on me, Revelations, and keep in mind, at this time, I'm desperate for this clue. After that period, I really backed off of studying the prophecy because it nearly consumed me. But in Revelation 17, in discussing the Mystery Kings, let me find the exact quote. I don't want to get it wrong at all. Okay, here we are. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must only remain for a little while. Now, there's more to it, but let's stop there because that's where the clue unlocks. So John, whether he's the apostle or Patmos, mm-hmm. he's saying that 5 of these kings have already lived, reigned, and died.
Right.
And he's saying 1 exists currently. And then he says, so currently in his time, which is 2,000 years ago. And then he says 1 is to come, but must remain for only a little while. Well, that is Adolf Hitler. And that is Adolf Hitler, and the dream reveals it because how could this man, John, have known that this Antichrist figure would arise, the very next Antichrist figure would arise, and then only reign for a short while? Hitler's war against God was very brief because he was only in power for a decade or so. But he was regarded as a nationally required messianic figure. Mm-hmm. And he obviously, right, he genocided the Jewish people. And he was reinstituting a sort of neo-pagan Nordic faith amongst the German people, which makes him fit the qualifications of an Antichrist king.
Right.
And presumably, the one that was Nero, because Nero too he ruled over the Roman Empire, and he demanded worship as a descendant of Jupiter, the Roman Zeus, mm-hmm. and he outlawed Christianity and slaughtered countless of them and enslaved others.
Yeah, there was also Domitian, the Roman Emperor Domitian.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I have not identified all 7, but those 2 fit perfectly, and another fits perfectly, and that's where we're going with Iraq in the WMDs.
Okay. All right. So let me take a quick time out. We'll come back
Sure.
and
Sure.
we'll talk about something as well that was happening just, I guess, prior to the Iraq invasion, involving some other archaeologists of coincidentally, German descent, back with, or German heritage. Let's take a time out, back with more of my conversation with Mark A. Carpenter. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Mark Carpenter is here, and we're talking about, well, we're getting into now the U.S. invasion of Iraq in March of 2003, and the search for weapons of mass destruction. But just prior to that, there was a team, I believe, of German archaeologists that were looking for something in the desert of Iraq. Who were they? What were they looking for?
So Jörg Fassbinder, he's from a university in Munich. Jörg Fassbinder had just announced probably the greatest archaeological discovery of all time, and that is not an exaggeration. Jörg Fassbinder announced the discovery of Gilgamesh's tomb outside of Baghdad in Iraq at the ancient city of Uruk, one of the oldest cities known to man, the biblical Erech.
Right. Which was what, the government seat or the capital of Mesopotamia, or was it Babylon still?
Well, Babylon became that's a the reigning seat of Mesopotamian empires shifted quite a few times, but yes, it was the seat of power, specifically of the biblical Nimrod, and the biblical Nimrod equates to Gilgamesh.
Right, Gilgamesh is.
Yes.
I believe it's considered one of the oldest epic tales of all time, the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, where he survived this flood, and it obviously mirrors or parallels the biblical flood story of Noah.
Correct. Well, so Gilgamesh, yes, this is the oldest. These cuneiform tablets are the oldest writing ever discovered. And they do include Sumerian versions of the biblical narrative. The biblical narrative is essentially revisions of these Sumerian narratives. Quick adjustment there. Gilgamesh actually isn't the sole survivor of the deluge. That would be his grandfather, who yes, equates to the biblical Noah, mm-hmm. And they call him, it's hard to pronounce, Upatishum. Upatishum, according to the Sumerian tablet, is the grandfather of this epic hero Gilgamesh. And that also equates to the biblical narrative in which Nimrod is a grandson of Noah. via the lineage of Ham, and then Ham begets Cush,
Right.
and then Cush begets Nimrod.
Right. So Nimrod is the great grandson of Noah, and then Gilgamesh would have been the great grandson of the Babylonian equivalent of Noah. So
Precisely.
are Gilgamesh then and Nimrod, are they the same person?
Absolutely. There's no, it's not, yes, there's really no room for debate there, because they both founded the exact same cities. According to the well, and there's much more. They are both regarded as a giant. They are both regarded as a mighty hunter. They are both regarded as Nephilim. Now the Bible doesn't come out and say specifically that he is a Nephilim, but he has all the earmarks of a Nephilim. And actually, the word Nimrod, the Bible is actually telling you that Nimrod is not his proper name. The Bible refuses to use the name Gilgamesh because the authors refuse to contribute to his legacy of renown. And that was a big thing for these Nephilim kings. They inscribed their names in stone so that they would have some degree of historical immortality. And Gilgamesh did so, which is precisely why we still know his name today. He was very successful in inscribing his name and his legacy in history. And the biblical authors were not going to play ball with that. And so they name him Nimrod, which literally means rebel, meaning to rebel against God.
Right. He built the Tower of Babel.
Exactly. And that tower in and of itself was a rebellion against God, because it empowered, well, it was waterproof, and it was made out of a certain material that was waterproof, and it reached up to the heavens, which was an inversion of God's holy mountains.
Right.
So if we think of Jacob's ladder, in which he sees Elohim, deities, angelic beings ascending and descending, and it says that this is a gate to heaven with God at its summit. And so Nimrod's tower was sort of a big, a major affront to the God, because it was not he. So this is like a man-made ladder, and sitting at atop its summit is not the God, but is Nimrod, or Gilgamesh's ancestral god, who is the Sumerian Shamash and the Akkadian Utu. I may actually have those reversed, but Utu Shamash is the ancient solar god, false god, who equates to the Egyptian Ra, the Greek Helios. We would most commonly know him today as Lucifer.
Right. And the waterproofing was in case God decided to flood the earth again, I guess.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Okay. Now let's go back to that final line of Revelation and how this all ties in. So John has described these 5 fallen kings, the one who is reigning, and there's 2 future ones. And I have identified number 6 as Adolf Hitler, as per my dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 7th and final king, he says, the beast who once was and now is not, and is going, is the 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction.
So he was, he will be again.
Exactly. So here we have an inversion of Christ, because we have this king who reigns over the earth, who fancies himself king of the whole earth, who dies and will be resurrected at the end times. Now, this brings us full circle to Jorg Fassbinder and his discovery of Gilgamesh's tomb in Iraq. So I know this is a lot.
Right.
And it's a lot to take in.
Okay, so the tomb. He announces this in what, early 2003?
Well, actually, no. That's a really interesting part about it. The official discovery announcements don't hit the scientific world until mid-April. But he had announced it to his colleagues and institutions earlier. And the timing of the Iraq invasion is a major fact that anybody who may question this, I want them to scrutinize very carefully, because Fassbinder discovers this tomb. Immediately, the United States must invade. Within months of Fassbinder's discovery, the United States is suddenly gearing up extreme. If you remember, the invasion was very hasty. A lot of people, when Bush's father invaded Iraq, he went to the UN. He got, he got this coalition. The Bush-Cheney administration was in a terrible rush to invade. They had a ragtag coalition, and they invaded almost immediately. And then there was archaeological looting of Iraq's National Museum, and all of this occurred on April 20th, Adolf Hitler's birthday, and the same day I had that dream. And I did not put that together. I had no idea any of that was going. I was aware there was an invasion, but I just figured this was about oil profits and geopolitical maneuvering. I didn't think there was anything else to it at the time. I was not even aware at the time of Fassbinder's discovery.
All right, another timeout. Back with more of a conversation in 2 minutes. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. So the U.S. forces invade Iraq March 20th, 2003. In a few weeks later, the Iraqi regime crumbles. I think it was around April 9th. That's when we, of course, that famous scene of toppling Saddam Hussein's statue. Mm-hmm. 11 days after that, there is the looting of the museum in Baghdad, all of these artifacts. That's Hitler's birthday. That was the April 20th was also the day you had this dream, being in this medieval castle, seeing Hitler hunched over a map pointing to someplace in Eurasia, I think you said.
Yes.
Was he pointing to Baghdad?
Well, yeah, not exactly. I think what I didn't get the perfect glimpse of where exactly he was pointing, but I think really it was just the general region, because this region is very significant in the prophecy in terms of later in the prophecy, it describes the Antichrist's forces, and they are invading from east to west, headed towards Jerusalem. And it says they are camped at the shores of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Right.
So let's back up just before the invasion. While gearing up for the invasion, W. Bush Jr., he called Jacques Chirac, the then president of France, and had a very strange conversation with him about this invasion. So Bush is trying to persuade him to join their coalition and help with the invasion. And Bush says to him, quote, well, he mentions, quote, their common faith, which people generally take to be Christianity, but I think he means something else, actually. But he makes reference to their common faith, and then he says, quote, Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. The biblical prophecies are being fulfilled. This confrontation is willed by God, who wants us to use this conflict to erase his people's enemies before a new age begins, end quote. Now, we know that quote happened because the French president was bewildered by this weirdness, and he sought the aid of a French theologian, Thomas Romer. And Thomas Romer later wrote about it in his book. And a journalist after that asked Chirac in an interview, when he's no longer president, if this conversation did indeed occur. And Chirac confirmed, yes, indeed it did. And he was very put off by it. He thought it was very fanatical and strange.
Right. Gog and Magog, Gog of Magog, or sometimes referred to as Gog and Magog. This is supposed to be the location of the final battle of good and evil, Armageddon.
Correct. And furthermore than that, Talmudic rabbis in the Voyosha, the Midrash Voyosha, along with Zephyr Zerubbabel. Zephyr Zerubbabel was the last of the Davidic Jews who founded the Second Temple, and he had a vision, interestingly, about the Third Temple and its destruction, and he also laid out his own prophecy about a Antichrist king who would be defeated by the Messiah. And furthermore, the Midrash and Zerubbabel both equated Gog, and you're correct, it's Gog of Magog. Mm-hmm. So they're not two figures. It is Gog of Magog, his land. And they both equate Gog to Nimrod.
Interesting.
Yes.
So let me ask you, when George W. Bush called Chirac and said, we're talking end time stuff here. We have to get involved in this. This is, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. This is the end.
Right.
Are you saying that Bush understood that this archaeological discovery of Nimrod's tomb meant that Nimrod, the Antichrist, had to be stopped, and that's why he wanted the invasion? Or did he come at it from the other side? In other words, we have to get control of Nimrod because this is who we worship.
That's right. And see, this gets back. So we're going to have to would take a really quick dive down this to a separate rabbit hole quickly. If you do an internet search for the genealogy of U.S. presidents, you will find that some time ago, a middle school student and her grandfather discovered that all but one president are linked genealogically to, they are descendants of King John of Laughlin. Furthermore, if you go back beyond that, they descend from Charlemagne. And on the deepest level, and even people like the House of Rothschild in their biographies say that they descend from Nimrod. And so what we're talking about are very highly diluted remnants of Nephilim kings. And this is where the whole entire concept of the divine right to rule comes from, the Nephilim. So just a real quick recap on that. And I know this is, we are in like the intellectual Olympics here.
Well, we're this program. My listeners are familiar with the concept of Nephilim from Genesis 6 or from Enoch, the Book of Enoch, and
excellent.
So these are the hybrids, the human fallen angel hybrids.
Right, and you will also know if you do a deep dive into European history of the royals, it is absolutely saturated in witchcraft. Just probably the most famous example would be like Mary, Queen of Scots, Bloody Mary, bathing in the blood of children to preserve her youth. And then we can flash forward to modern times. We have these men gathering together at Bohemian Grove, right, where they do an offering every summer to this giant wooden owl idol. And none of this is conjecture. So right, when he is speaking to Sharuk, he knows they share a chromosome or two. And he is saying to Sharuk, our common faith, meaning Satanism, and Gog, meaning Nimrod. And it appears that Sharuk does not even believe in this, and he's not even aware of it. But Bush is. And although, George W. Bush, not the brightest bulb in the box, he may have been reading a script that was written for him. Yep. But regardless, he is talking directly about Nimrod and his tomb and this discovery. And yes, indeed, I submit to you, this is the WMD they were so desperate to acquire.
The tomb of Nimrod, was that taken to the museum in Baghdad? Was that looted?
They were both looted. The tomb, no. His tomb had not yet been raised. That's really my point about the timing. They had to initiate an international conflict to disrupt Fassbinder's work. Because if Fassbinder had been allowed to continue, there's no telling where those remains would have ended up. Or whatever. The point is, they wanted to get it directly. Now, the museum contained many artifacts from all over Nimrod's empire that related to Gilgamesh. And now let's talk about the looting of that museum really quick.
Right. I remember the Baghdad battery was supposedly taken.
That's right. That's right. That's what they were after from the museum, was ancient technological, sort of, for lack of a better word, not technology in the way we think of it, but ancient technology. Mm-hmm. They were after exotic ancient technology that had belonged to Nimrod, Gilgamesh, and they looted the museum. Iraqi locals claimed to witness U.S. troops looting the museum in the dead of night. And I know for a fact that it was not Iraqi citizen looters. That may have occurred after the fact. But whoever these initial looters were, they walked right past huge racks of gold coins, what would equate to millions and millions of dollars in gold coins. And they went straight for the vault. And all they removed were thousands of objects relating to Nimrod. And then, so there was a White House committee of archaeological and antiquities experts, and they were called CPAC. CPAC stands for Cultural Possessions Advisory Committee. The three heads of that committee resigned. They resigned in protest because they understood that this was a preemptive war and that the US military was well aware of the existence of this museum and the treasures that it held. And they could not accept that the US military just, nonchalantly left it unguarded. And I suspect they know the US military looted it. Now, they didn't say that publicly because, if they had, they'd be making a very nasty enemy of a very corrupt and criminal White House. So I think they resigned because they knew the US military was at the very least complicit with the looting of that museum.
What did the artifacts in the museum have to do with Nimrod's? I mean, these artifacts may be connected to Nimrod in some way, but how does looting the Baghdad Museum of these artifacts prevent Fassbinder from raising Nimrod's crypt or what have you?
Well, I think it was just a grab of, you see, they understand that Nimrod was not just a man. They understand that he is a Nephilim hybrid. And while we're on that really quick, according to these ancient tablets about Gilgamesh, they specifically state that he is 2/3 non-human and 1/3 human. And in the Revelation prophecy, it says this calls for somebody with wisdom. And it says the beast has a number, and that number is 666.
Mm-hmm.
And that number is the number of a man, and let those with wisdom decipher that. You see, John understood, he was familiar with the Gilgamesh tale, as everybody in the ancient world was, because it was so famous. Again, that legacy of renown. And so what is a 2/3 fraction converted to a decimal? It is 66.6%. So he is leaving us a clue. While they don't want to announce his identity, but he is leaving us with a clue that equals 666. And that relates to what you're asking, why are these artifacts and remains so important? Because Nimrod isn't just a warlord king. He's a hybrid of vast destructive knowledge and power. He had ancient technology, which enabled him to do these wondrous building projects. I found other Jewish scholars who suggested that Nimrod, by way of his father Cush, came into possession of garments that belonged to Adam. And these garments enabled him to have very powerful combat abilities. And I don't know what those are, but I speculate perhaps an invisibility, a garment that rendered him invisible, perhaps.
Right.
That's just speculation.
Okay.
So I don't know that.
The invading U.S. forces, was it their mission to take Nimrod's remains back to America?
Absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, local Iraqis also claim to have witnessed U.S. troops digging in the dirt out at the archaeological site. Now I can't confirm, I can't prove that, but I can prove that no significant archaeology has been done there since. And despite the instability of the region, it has settled down quite a lot since the conflict.
Yes.
And it's been under U.S. control. So there's no way they would not have resumed such an epic discovery. We really can't overstate the significance of that discovery. Scholars weren't sure, mainstream scholars were not sure that Gilgamesh even existed. So this is tantamount to finding the tomb of Moses or King Arthur or something like that.
Well, it's amazing. I don't think there's ever been an archaeological find that has contradicted the Bible. It's always confirmation of what the Bible says. So, in your estimation, did they take control of Gilgamesh's or Nimrod's remains? And if so, what are they planning on doing with them?
Well, so I believe they did. And that's why there has been no follow-up, because they have been preventing it. Because if there were a follow-up discovery, what they would find would be a big, huge, empty sarcophagus. And then people could quite easily connect the dots. So they have sealed off this find so people could not follow up on it. And I believe they found it. And I believe they raised Gilgamesh's tomb on Adolf Hitler's birthday as part of a symbolic, you see, because they understand what I just broke down, that this is a succession of Antichrist kings. And these people meaning the ruling elites who pull strings of people like Bush and Cheney, they understand the symbolic, ritualistic nature of what they're involved in, and so they raise it up not only as a manifestation of the prophecy, but also as a continuation of Third Reich science. Just as Operation Paperclip brought over German scientists like von Braun, and then the first soft lunar landing occurs on April 20. So that's an homage to Adolf Hitler's dream of landing on the moon.
I'm sorry, that was July 20, wasn't
it? Soft landing of the modules. Yes, you're correct. The manned first touchdown on July 20. But and actually there was a crappy module that they sent up, but the first soft landing of a thing that could take pictures and observe the surface of the moon, that was on Adolf Hitler's birthday. I believe it was 67 or 9. Okay. So, and by the way, you mentioned earlier the German heritage of these scientists. I do not think that's coincidental. In fact, the German scientist who co-directed alongside Fassbinder, his name is Eichmann. And I do not, that's a lot of smoke for no fire there.
As in Adolf Eichmann.
Precisely. And who was one of the head Nazi scientists. So that would be that's far too much smoke for no fire. We're beyond reasonable doubt there that these things are all interconnected.
So the elites possibly have Nimrod's remains. He is the Antichrist. He will be resurrected, will appear during the tribulation, sort of the countdown to the end times. takes a prominent role on the stage 3.5 years into the 7-year tribulation. Is there a particular ritual that they need to perform in order to resurrect? Do we know, Nimrod? Or
I really, there, it's hard to say what they're up to behind closed doors, but I will say, they successfully cloned a sheep in 96. And that's, that there's been a lot of time that's passed since then. And right now, as we speak, I know laboratories in Japan. Now, while these laboratories are in Japan, they are most likely funded by Western money and these elites. And these laboratories in Japan have publicly stated that they are attempting to clone extinct species. So these laboratories, their whole focus is cloning ancient DNA, and they are attempting to clone woolly rhinoceros. They are attempting to clone woolly mammoths and mastodons, and that's just what they say publicly. So we do indeed have the technology to clone an ancient human being, an ancient hybrid. And this explains, it doesn't just explain, that's what's so profound here. It explains the prophecy in terms of one who was and is yet to come. But also, how on earth did this man John know these things? That the sixth Antichrist would reign for only a short while, and then this final one is one who already existed previously and will come again. So they have his remains. They are attempting to clone him. And this is the decipherment of the Revelation prophecy. And when you objectively look at all of this, it takes you to a disturbing place that indeed we are living in end times. And if you imagine what the reign of a modern day Nimrod looks like, it's incredibly terrifying. We're talking about a 17-foot tall, psychopathic, demon worshiping, dark wizard and tyrant who absolutely hates humanity and who hates God, and who knows he is earmarked for execution.
It's interesting because he has to convince the world that he is actually the second coming, that he is the Messiah. Will he? I mean, if he comes as a 17-foot tall, entity, that'll be kind of a tip off, won't it? Will he morph?
Well, that's why they're going to outlaw the Abrahamic religions, because indeed, and that's also why the powers that be right now are desensitizing everybody to demonic worship. You'll notice how books and movies and video games and TV shows, all of them are highly demonic. Every public ceremony, a demonic spectacle, ritual. And the so-called UFO phenomena, they're painting. That's how they're going to deceive many people. Oh no! These religions are primitive interpretations of alien visitation. Do not, to your audience, I implore you, do not accept that narrative. These are not benevolent interstellar visitors, and that is it's called predictive programming. It's a CIA technique, and we know this from declassified documents. This is a propaganda technique by which it's just like grooming, like a sexual predator would groom a child. They introduce these concepts so that when the victimization occurs, they accept it.
Well, Yeah, it's going to be a seven years of literally hell on earth. The good news is the good guys win in the end. So that's the silver lining.
That's right. I don't want to. It's very difficult for me to try and convince people of this because I don't want. I at one time I was a rescue swimmer, and when they were training us, they showed us horrific videos of failed rescues and people dying, drowning, kids drowning, and it was horrific to watch. It's also like in driver's ed where they show the students, these terrible videos of car accidents and the gruesome footage. So on one hand, I think people do need to be scared straight, so they sober up and wake up from their media induced slumber. But absolutely, I am not delivering a hopeless message. The faithful will absolutely be rewarded. And all of the Abrahamic religions actually predict that the Messiah will return and vanquish this Antichrist at the end of his 7-year reign, just as you said. The lion will return as the lamb. Absolutely. But yes, the Quran actually discusses how Nimrod, they don't say Nimrod, but I am plugging in Nimrod. They call him the Dajjal, just meaning Antichrist. But they say that by communing with demons and black magic, he will mimic the miracles of Jesus. So he will heal people and he will raise people from the dead. And by that mechanism, combined with media programming, people will regard him as an alien hybrid who's mistakenly benevolent, and the religious people will be deemed sort of, these crazy superstitious folk who are like prejudiced towards this friendly hybrid who's actually our savior because of his knowledge. Oh, and he will be endorsed by the Roman Catholic Church.
Aha.
And that is yet another key unlocking the Revelation prophecy. The harlot who rides the beast atop 7 hills with her fancy purple garments and her jewels. That is a reference to the Vatican, who will endorse Nimrod as the authentic Messiah.
Amazing journey you've taken on us. You've taken us on, Mark. The website. Give us the website again.
Yes. So markacarpenter.com is the blog, and there is an accompanying Patreon. Me and my colleagues, there's a lot of work to do. We're working really hard to warn people and to infuse some truth into their algorithm. We're trying to reconcile science and ancient tradition in people's hearts and minds, so they're prepared whenever this does occur. And My Apocalyptic Chronicles is the Instagram account, and they're all interlinked. So if everybody could please join and subscribe and support whatever you can, we deeply appreciate it, and it all goes right back into the cause of trying to get the truth out there to the people.
Mark, great talking to you again. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. You're welcome. I really appreciate you having me on, Richard.
My pleasure. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.